This video contains spoilers for Arcane Season 1 and 2. You certainly can think, maybe even multiple times a day, of spicy scenes with Caitlyn. But what about her neurospicy scenes? Don't worry, I have you covered. I will discuss if Caitlyn might be considered autistic or not, why, and what our insights reveal about her and about the whole series. Before some of you start complaining about politics or tags being pushed on fictional characters instead of just chilling with Netflix and forgetting all the debates of the real world, hear me out. I am not pushing anything. I am not saying that Caitlyn is autistic. I don't know if she really is. In the show, nobody scans her brain, she doesn't receive a diagnosis by a certified therapist, and she doesn't self-diagnose. Therefore, we will never know for sure. There is no definitive confirmation, but also no definitive disproval. Each viewer can draw their own conclusion and choose the interpretation they like the most based on the non-definitive elements we are given. I would call this an autistic coding. I'm not saying that Caitlyn is autistic, but I am asking if she might be autistic coded. What does this mean? It means that she displays some elements in common with autistic people. Therefore, people who share these experiences or are interested in this topic can recognize these elements as possibly linked to autism. I will highlight these elements of Caitlyn in several scenes so that then you can judge on your own if they are sufficient for you to consider her autistic or not. Before we start, where do these elements come from? Who said they are typical of autistic people? Despite being interested and having learned a few things about autism, I am not an expert. I trust what I have heard or read autistic people say about themselves. I will link some sources in the description so that you can consult them firsthand too. However, we have to keep in mind that having autistic traits does not equal to being autistic. Autistic people are people, therefore they are all different and they have different combinations of traits at different intensities. Not all of them have all the typical autistic traits. Similarly, neurotypical people are not autistic, but they can have some traits that are common in autistic people. Having a few similarities to many autistic people is not a proof of being autistic. These traits are common for autistic people, but not exclusive to them. It's a complex topic, and it adds to reasons why we can say for sure that Caitlyn is autistic, just because she exhibits some common autistic traits. But we can highlight their presence and recognize that she shares some experiences with autistic people. Here are the scenes where this happens. The first scene of Caitlyn I spotted that, if I had seen a real person do, I would wonder if they might be in the autistic spectrum, is in episode 4, season 1. She is repeatedly spinning a gun while focusing on the investigation she has been building for months. Tell me this doesn't look like an autistic person stimming while enjoying her favorite special interest. Let's tackle each one of these elements individually. Stimming means making an action, often a repetitive movement or sound, that soothes or regulates a person's state. Everybody does it. For example, tapping your fingers on a table during a long wait, or unintentionally humming while doing an activity. But apparently it's more common and evident for autistic people, also because prejudices see their stimming practices as unusual and weird, while they accept them in neurotypical people. Caitlyn doesn't steam a lot. I see her doing it only here and in episode 8, season 2, when she fiddles with a boat model while reflecting about the impending Noxian invasion and discussing with Vi. On the contrary, her obsession for the investigation about Jinx is much more evident. It's an interest that absorbs her intensely. Even Vi in episode 8, season 1, is impressed at how much information Caitlyn collected about Zone without going there, and she comments, "And I thought Powder could get obsessed." Caitlyn is so focused on the investigation that she orchestrated Vi's release from prison so that she can go with her to Zone in person. In season 2, her earthy special interest combines with the rage for her mother's death and becomes a true consuming extreme obsession. In the attempt to catch Jinx, Caitlyn accepts becoming a dictator and militarily invades Zone. Another element that might count as a special interest or playing into her special interest, because it is always included into investigations against Jinx, is Caitlyn's extraordinary capacity of looking for clues in the environment and reconstruct vividly the events that produced those traces. It denotes a very developed skill of observation and finding logical links between elements, and the whole is represented in the series, highlighting how Caitlyn's mind can figure out a sort of film about reconstructed events. Another trait typically autistic that Caitlyn displays is difficulty in social interactions because of misunderstanding of implicit norms. We see her being awkward in interactions or missing social cues in several cases. While having a break with her co-workers in episode 4 season 1, she doesn't join the conversation if not to correct an information mentioned by a co-worker, and then she explains the correct information, even if probably her co-workers don't care about that topic. This is not only awkward interaction, but it could be similar to the experience of autistic people having a lot of information about a special interest and sharing it with other people who, however, are not that interested in the topic. Later, when Jace visits her after she was affected by Jinx's explosion, he brings her some flowers, but she doesn't thank him nor greet him. She takes the flowers and she throws them on the side and starts sharing her enthusiasm about her special interest, the investigation. Again, she shares the information that she finds exciting with a person she wants to bond with, even if that person is not as excited as her on the topic. In episode 5, season 1, when she goes to the fish soup vendor in Zone with Vi, Caitlyn is super stressed about progressing her investigation, and she thinks that Vi is boycotting her by choosing a time-consuming side quest, such as the fish soup. By the way, this seems to indicate that Caitlyn likes predictable plans and doesn't like deviating from them, similarly to how autistic people like routines and pre-planned activities. Anyway, soon after, Vi shows her the precious information she just received from the fish soup vendor, and Caitlyn realizes she has been reading the whole situation wrong, because Vi was contributing to her mission even while stopping for this meal. Later in the brothel, Vi prompts her to talk with a stranger, and Caitlyn does, but very awkwardly. Also, the flashback at the start of episode 5, season 1, shows a young Caitlyn being extremely frank by bluntly accusing Grayson of letting her win the shooting competition. Grayson doesn't get offended, luckily, but she highlights how this is not a polite approach to discuss the topic. Another thing Caitlyn has, and that is often said to be more frequent in autistic people, is a very strong sense of justice. The accusation against Grayson can count like her trying to find out the truth about a suspicion of a rigged competition. Caitlyn shows several times that she cares for justice and truth. During season 1, her whole investigation about Jinx is motivated by her desire to arrest a criminal, find the culprit for troubles in the city, and stop them. But also, during season 1, she finds out that Zone's situation is not as simple as she thought, and that Piltover is not as innocent as she thought. When she is back in Piltover, in episode 8, season 1, she voices loudly her concerns about Piltover's role in Zone misery, in front of her parents and in front of the council, arguing for accountability from Piltover and action in favor of Zone. During most of season 2, this trait of her disappears because the grief for her mother overwhelms her and makes her prioritize revenge, even if it includes hurting innocent people. It's coherent with her very negative arc that makes her reject her previous positive traits. But even in this mind state, she can't speak insincerely. When Ambessa asks her, she can't refrain from admitting she doesn't trust her, and even Ambessa is impressed by Caitlyn's frankness. Then Caitlyn is back to pursuing justice later in the season. I wish we had more scenes elaborating how she deals with the consequences of her unjust actions, because we have very little. We see that she gives up her seat at the council for a Zonate councillor, but it's not a lot compared to her military occupation. Anyway, we still have a few hints about her restored sense of justice. In the famous prison scene with Vi, in episode 8, season 2, she doesn't allow herself to enjoy the moment without first interrupting it and telling Vi the truth about her relationship history, because she feels the need to be completely honest with her. Only after Vi has all the needed information to decide how to deal with her, she lets her proceed with the intimate fun. In episode 9, she fights against Ambessa despite having a dagger stuck in her liver, and intentionally sacrifices her eye in order to stop and protect Piltover. Now that I have illustrated the traits of Caitlyn that made me think about this topic, let's comment them and the knowledge we have acquired about Caitlyn. Do these elements make Caitlyn or anybody undoubtedly autistic? No. As said, these traits are more common in autistic people, but they are not unseen in neurotypical people. Moreover, we don't see what Caitlyn does or does not the whole time, so the information we have about her on the topic is very limited. And let's remind that the series does not give us openly the information that Caitlyn is autistic nor that she is not. It's up to us to interpret it if we are interested in this topic. What we can surely determine, however, is this unwillingness of the series to give certain information about this topic. This could be said for other characters too, but it's particularly curious for Caitlyn because the series is willing to give her some traits that might be linked with autism without, however, confirming nor denying anything. This means that the series decides not to point out a definition for Caitlyn's brain, but simply show that these traits exist and some people can have them. This allows viewers with the same traits, and I guess that among them are some autistic people too, to recognize them and see some of their own experiences in Caitlyn. At the same time, these traits are presented as normal, and this judgment, or rather absence of judgment, expands to these same traits in the viewers too, while encouraging the whole audience to abstain from judging them, in Caitlyn or in anyone. This is coherent with the normalizing attitude of the series towards several groups of people that usually are perceived as different because of prejudices in the Western societies, but not in Piltover. I'm talking, for example, about queer people or people of color. In our society, there are discriminations against them, and in fact, there is one group of people that is considered the norm, while the others are perceived as different and discriminated. On the contrary, in Piltover we never see anybody describing another person as gay or hetero, black or white, despite their evident existence. For example, we see two women being in love with each other, and some characters having different skin tones or ethnical traits. But these things are not considered the norm nor a difference from the norm. Everything is judged equally normal in Piltover. Therefore, there is no need to categorize people into groups based on their distance or closeness to the inexistent norm. My guess is that in Piltover, they only discriminate against Zonites and low-class people. But they don't have those other discriminations that we, unfortunately, know so well. They perceive people as being attracted to some genders rather than others, or having a darker or lighter skin tone, like we perceive people being taller or shorter. It's evident that human variety in these aspects exists, but it is not deemed significant to classify a person because of it. This is what happens with Caitlyn too, if we assume that she is in fact autistic. Her traits are never spotted as something strange by other characters. She is not assigned a category of difference based on those. There is one more thing to point out about autism in Piltover. Even if Piltover had the concept of autistic people as being different than a certain norm of neurotype, it might not correspond to our definition of autism. In fact, it's been observed that the perception and diagnosis of autism changes greatly from place to place and from period to period. I will put references in the description for you to consult. This is because many autistic traits become recognizable as such when they diverge from what is considered the norm. However, who decides what the norm is? It's not a natural concept, but a cultural one. This means that in different cultures there are different ideas of what is a normal behavior, what are the politeness rules when having a social interaction, what way of expressing emotions is considered appropriate, and so on. Some of these cultural definitions of norm can have different degrees of suitability with the spontaneous traits of every person, and this is true for an autistic person too. Their traits can be considered more or less similar to the norm depending on what the norm is. This is why a person who is considered autistic in a context might not be defined as such in another one. The person is always the same, but the perception of them changes. This is why I say Piltover might not even know what autism is, let alone if Caitlyn is autistic. Maybe in Piltover's concept of norm, autistic people don't stick out as different. I think that this is an interesting point to consider because it reminds us that autistic people are not weird, but the context in which they live sometimes defines them as weird. And that is a fabricated discrimination, like all prejudices are. Remembering that discriminations are artificial reminds to us that they are not natural, they can be avoided and eliminated, especially since they hurt people. This is why I think it is interesting spotting Caitlyn's trait similar to autism and consider if she might be autistic. Even if we can't find a definitive answer, we have reflected upon interesting topic and enriched our understanding of autism in our reality. In the end, I think that each viewer can decide for themselves if the few traits spotted in Caitlyn are enough to convince them that she is autistic or not. As said, it does not change anything about her or the plot, it's just a possible personal interpretation that some people might connect with more than others. I talk about more of Caitlyn's introspection and her other type of spiciness in this video. So, what is your conclusion? Is Caitlyn autistic or not in your headcanon? Also, have you noticed some other relevant traits that I missed in her? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe for more arcane essays, and see you in the next video. Bye!